will get started. So thank you everybody for attending today's info session for our Predictive Analytics for CPAs course. As we get started today, we do want to begin with a territorial acknowledgement. The university that much of our work takes place on the traditional territory of the neutral Anishinaabe and Haudenosaunee peoples. Our main campus is situated on the Haldeman Tract, the land granted to the Six Nations that includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. Our active work towards reconciliation takes place across our campuses through research, learning, teaching, and community building, and is centralized within the Office of Indigenous Relation. We do have a link there if you want to learn more information about the territory that you reside on, whether it be at home or in your workplace, so feel free to check that out if you'd like to. So for today's session, if you do have any audio or video difficulties that come up, we do have Derek from WattSpeed here. To introduce myself, my name is Ethan. I am a client success advisor at WattSpeed. But for assistance with audio or video difficulties, please message Derek from WattSpeed in the chat and he will be happy to assist you. As we progress through today's session, there will be a time for Q&A at the end, so you can either put your questions in the chat and we will get to them during that time, or if you'd like to reserve them to yourself until we reach the Q&A, the choice is yours. So without further ado, I will turn it over to your instructors for today's info session and for our course. Bo and Will, please take it away.
Thank you, Ethan. It's Will here. So very quickly, we're going to spend just a little bit of time today to talk about what the course will entail as it comes to predictive analytics, and also share with you a little bit of the story on how the course came about and what it hopes to achieve. To get us going, let me do some introductions. I'll do the introductions for myself and Bo. So Bo's a VP of Tax and Treasury at Cineplex Entertainment. He leads automation, and what I mean by that is he's the Center of Excellence lead and focuses on using robotics automation process, RPA, machine learning, and predictive analytics to drive process optimization and deliver data-driven insights. Both Bo and I lectured at the University of Waterloo for master's as well as undergrad courses. I focus on data analytics. I do consulting around cybersecurity and data for clients in the United States and in Canada. And what we're hoping to do today is kind of share some of the background on why the course is about and hopefully answer some of your questions here. To give you a little more context, the course was designed by 2 professors at the University of Waterloo, Theo and Nancy, both of whom are data scientists as well as business process folks, and is driven and geared towards financial and CPA background individuals to help you understand how predictive analytics can be deployed in your organization. With that, Ethan, if you don't mind moving me to the next slide here. Thank you. So we may ask, and I know a lot of my clients do, they kind of look at data and they say, you know, what are we trying to do? How are we trying to make value out of data? I think a lot of us hear the nuances and read the articles about data analytics and big data and think there's a gold mine behind it. In my experience, and I know Bo will share his in a second too, there certainly is. There's benefit of using the right data to go through data-driven decision making and making sure that that data makes it to the right decision makers at the right time so we can make the best business decisions. In, I think, today's market, if you have a look at the chart on the right, we can see that this use of data is very much prevalent in industries such as banking, insurance, and telecom. But of course, it is there for other organizations as well. Part of the reason we want to bring everyone together, and if you go to slide 5, Ethan, to talk about this data market and the importance of the data market. Oh, thank you. Actually, the slide 5, so sorry. There you go, thank you. So part of the reason we want to do this is because we do think that data can be leveraged in many sectors, and in some cases right now is under leveraged. When we look at how we can use the quantity and the value of data, whether it's in our accounting systems, in our HR systems, or even in our customer databases, a lot of organizations are at the infancy of realizing A, what they have, and B, what they can do about it. I think to be part of this journey, to start this conversation, we need to get to fundamentals. And in the course that we're trying to offer, we're going to take you to those fundamentals so you can have meaningful conversations, not only with your teams and your leaders, but also with cross-functional teams as well. So in this slide, what you can see is data modification and quantification. And you're going to see two colors there on the left and the right. One is modification, and the other one is quantifying the value of data in the accounting systems. Those numbers are quite similar across industries, but we see banking again jumping ahead, which is not much of a surprise. But frankly, when we look at this survey across sectors, the fundamentals, whether you're in banking or automotive or telecommunications, the fundamentals are going to be the same. And that's the fundamentals we hope to deliver and teach through this offering. If we go to slide 6, Ethan, so next slide. So I've talked a little bit about, the use of data, modification, and how to make good data-driven decisions. We do want to highlight or baseline what we mean when we say predictive analytics. When we think about predictions, oftentimes we are all doing it as part of our day-to-day. What we are trying to do in this course is to say, how do we take a business issue that you currently have and try to use the data that's available to you and drive to a data-driven, forward-looking solution that can offer not only solutions, but alternatives to your leadership. We want to make sure that everyone understands the limitation of these models so that we're not thinking that this is a crystal ball that's 100% certain. But we also want to make sure we influence decisions by leveraging valid modeling and incorporating what we know as business case knowledge or business know-how. And at the end of the day, folks always ask, predictive analytics, what does it translate to? Well, really, we're trying to use data to do one of two things. We're either trying to increase revenue or reduce our costs. That is the highlight of, I think, the business problems we're trying to solve. Now, if we move to the next slide, I think Bo's going to kind of walk us through what does this mean for a finance professional. Go ahead, Bo.
Perfect. Thanks, Will. So I know that a lot of you guys that are attending this session right now are, in finance or in FP&A and finance-related roles, and there's a reason for that, right? We really targeted this course to finance professionals because, in the last number of years, really since analytics first really entered kind of the business mainstream, many finance departments have attempted to really leverage data and predictive analytics to really drive better decision-making, better data-driven decision-making. And even if your finance team hasn't yet, you likely, very shortly will be, because predictive analytics are now starting to be embedded directly into most financial software applications that you're using today, whether it's your ERP system like Oracle or SAP, all the way into Excel and Outlook. And best of all, a lot of these tools, you don't even actually need to be a programmer to really make use of it either. And the reason that it's really being embedded into a lot of these financial applications is because finance professionals like yourselves possess many of the innate skills that's required to really leverage and translate the insights of data. And by virtue of also being in charge of a lot of the financial information, means you also have access to much of that data as well. But the value that many finance departments are actually getting out of these solutions is decidedly mixed. I would say that most finance departments are very solid in what I call descriptive analytics, which means things like historical analysis, creating dashboards or scorecards and KPIs using that historical data. But to really move beyond kind of the table stakes of descriptive analytics and into the realm of predictive analytics or even prescriptive analytics, such as statistical based forecasting or even dynamic price or cost optimizations, requires that people like yourself develop the right skill set and receive the right training to really leverage the power of data. So Ethan, if you can jump to the next slide. Perfect. So for us, the most important skills I would say in terms of predictive analytics in the early phases really include just having an understanding of the business. What are the factors that really drive revenues, costs, key metrics, et cetera, for your own business? And I'm confident that all of you already on this call have that knowledge and experience just by virtue of your respective roles. Instead, what we find people have difficulty with is really being able to get results in the form of analytical solutions from real business issues. which requires some understanding of the underlying technology or even the principles of how these different algorithms work and the format that the data needs to be in before it actually can ingest it and use it. And I'm not saying that you need to be, an expert at programming, but having an understanding of just how to prepare and clean data, how data is actually utilized by different models and algorithms, what things like correlation coefficients, what R-squared scores represent, is going to make it a lot easier to produce and really understand the analytic results that you get. And lastly, kind of what is essential to the effectiveness of analytics is really being a good data storyteller, right? Because after all, the goal of analytics is really to leverage the insights that it provides and turn those into tangible actions that you actually can enhance the organization's success. And this often requires kind of putting these results into the kind of context that is suited for the audience, which often is visual in the form of either graphs, charts, or 3D models. And this is all to really ensure that the results of analytics are presented in a way that enables and motivates the intended audience to take action. Because really the best analytic results is the ones that people can actually understand. Ethan, if you want to jump to the next slide. Perfect. So we put together a few case studies of some of the predictive analytic scenarios that Will and I have kind of used in the real world situation scenarios. So I'll kind of go into detail into the first one, just because it's near and dear to me, and then maybe Will can jump in on some of the other ones. So for the first one, I'm sure that I'm not alone when I say that COVID had a big impact on many businesses. But for Cineplex especially, we're a movie exhibition business, where we were effectively closed for pretty much more than a year. It meant that when we were starting to reopen, we needed to really take a holistic look at our business in terms of, did we have locations that are not economically feasible anymore in the new world? And so we needed to actually have a strategy to actually identify what the impact is on what potential theater closures could mean for the rest of the circuit. And on the face of it, the issue seems pretty simple, right? It's, if we close the theater, presumably a portion of the people that were going to that theater will simply shift to another theater. And maybe another, hopefully smaller portion of that attendance is actually just going to stop going altogether, because now maybe their commute went from a 20-minute drive to the theater to a 40-minute drive, and that might not be worth it anymore. But actually predicting the percentage of people that will actually transfer to a Cineplex theater versus people who stop going, or even people that end up going to a competitor theater, is much more difficult. And in the past, you would, if you were doing this analysis, you might do a deep dive onto, specific locations. You would get all the relevant information, maybe have a business analyst go through all the information, make a spreadsheet, maybe set up some discussions with various stakeholders, and then hopefully come to a consensus on what this approximate or appropriate transfer rate might be. But this kind of decision usually entails human biases or even knowledge gaps, right? We have, theaters across the country, in different regions, different provinces, different cities, each one with their own individual characteristics and location-specific characteristics as well. So, and on top of this, it would take a lot of hours, a lot of time and effort to really just get to a baseline number. And that might not even result in an actual good decision. And this is really where, predictive analytics really shine for us, in the sense that we could actually train a model using historical data and historical closures to really determine and assess what is an appropriate transfer rate. And then once you train the model on the important criteria that actually influences that transfer rate, you can now take that model and easily scale it out across the entire circuit and have it predict kind of the transfer rates for every single location across the entire country based on each location's specific data. And normally if you think about it, you might think, oh, that kind of analysis requires, a dedicated data science team. You need to get a cross-functional team, you get many people involved. I would say that, the best part of this model is that it really just started from me just kind of playing around with some of the data that was readily available to the finance team. And because I understood the business issue, I had to access the right data, and I knew how that data needed to be formatted. I could turn that business problem into an analytic solution. And now it's become a key component of how decision making is done by both our operations team and analyst team. And it really just came about from just having a fundamental understanding of how do you utilize these tool sets and these skills, and you can really extract a lot of value without having to know kind of the background of coding or statistical models or anything like that. And that's really what this course is really designed to help you with. The point is that you don't need to have a PhD in stats or anything like that. As long as you understand how to frame business issues and how to translate algorithm findings into business rationales, you can add significant value by leveraging data in ways that historically have not been available to finance teams. Will, do you want to jump in on some of the other cases?
Thank you. So Bo shared a scenario with you folks that worked very well. Part of the reason is Bo was involved with it. Let me share a different perspective. So the second one, when we looked at a client, we wanted to predict the lifetime warranty cost for vehicles. So imagine you buy a car, you've had it for 3-4 years, or maybe even 5 years, and you go to the dealership and you want to buy extended warranty. Our client here was trying to predict if you buy a certain model, if you have a certain mileage, how much should they charge for that warranty? And the reason I say it's a little different is because this business problem, while straightforward, it had many different stakeholders who were trying to solve for it. The dealers in question had an innate interest to make sure that that warranty price was as high as possible because they wanted to get paid, obviously, a larger margin. They wanted to realize a higher cost. You had others, such as part suppliers, who wanted to make sure that their part was not going to be blamed for any warranty issues. So instead of a data-driven issue, when we walked in the room, it became a very back and forth, political, a lot of finger pointing, that kind of issue, as opposed to that. That was a challenge. Now, the team we're working with, again, is the finance team who had access to all this data, who had the ability to pull the data together. What they were missing was, how do you review models or predictions or data sets and try to identify, A, are you able to make the prediction? Do you have clean data? Do you have enough data? And B, once you make the prediction, which model works out the best? Which model should you choose? So we were working with the executive team to plan this approach, and we wanted to walk them through what an R-square meant. We wanted to walk them through how you want to assess the fundamentals of this data. And in this example, when they looked at the data set across the board, the initial answer was, we don't have enough of the information. We are missing too many fields. But when we went through data cleansing, they actually had all they needed. It was a little bit of stitching. It was a little bit of QA to make sure that data is comprehensively there. But at the end of the day, they had enough of the fundamentals there to make the decision. And once we kind of went into the predictive modeling, we realized, out of all the models that were out there, or out of all the decision points or decision criteria they had to make, there was one obvious choice, which gave them the cleanest data and also gave them the prediction that was most reliable. And there was business reasons behind that as well. As a result of this, they were able to reduce their warranty cost for certain vehicle and increase for others, therefore generating more revenue and being more fair to both the dealers as well as to the customers. So in my example, I think it did require a lot more cross-functional collaboration. It also required a little more thought to get back to fundamentals, which is what I think people are missing. There's too many cases of folks talking about AI and ML, and while it sounds great, you have to go back to the fundamentals of the data and make sure the data is clean. Okay. Why don't we move to the next page, Ethan? And quickly, we'll go through one more example here. The next one, and we'll skip the risk score for a second. We might save that for the actual course, but I'll talk about retaining employees. I think this day and age, I hear we're in the space of the great resignation. We actually worked with an employee HR group, employer HR group, to look at how can we understand why folks may be leaving, or at least one dimension of why they may be leaving the organization. In this scenario, we were able to get information, obviously clean information without people's personal details and not identifiable to them. We're able to see that if someone moved away from the office, let's say 20, 30 minutes further, the chances of them perhaps leaving was 60, 80%, right? And that's a huge correlation and a huge predictive factor. In this situation, this happened prior to COVID. The same model now is deployed at this particular client after COVID. And what they're trying to do is be proactive in having conversations with employees to say, we notice that you may be moving or may be living now a little further away from the office. What can we do to make it work? How can we build a model where you are continuously engaged, where you can be fulfilled in your role? And how can we make sure that you stay within the organization? That's one aspect of it. The other aspect of it, the organization now is able to predict and say, okay, out of this team, let's say of 10, there's 6 that may be on the fringe of leaving. How do I plan for this? How do I get contingencies in place, right? So this kind of predictive analytics, while you build once, and it's a lot of effort to build, in a changing business environment these days, especially with COVID, it can be repeated with the right understanding to drive better business decisions. Okay. Why don't we move on from this, Ethan? So that's kind of the case studies. Next, I want to talk a little bit, folks, about, okay, so we've talked about big picture, why data matters, what predictive analytics is. Next, let's talk about the course that was designed. Again, Theo and Nancy designed this course with the real world in mind. So to begin, the data that we are using is a real world retail driven data. And what we're going to be doing is taking that data from beginning to end, from day 1 all the way to day, I think in this case, probably 3-4 months out. And what we're using is this real data to make some predictions. And the idea here is to start in day 1, to start building the fundamentals, going back to what Bo talked about, which is a business problem. We're going to throw business problems to the participants. We're going to have conversations and live sessions with Bo and I leading to talk about what those business problems can be. And we're going to take you through the data analytics journey. So preparing the data, understanding your data, going through predictive analytics. And while this course is not meant to be a hardcore programming or technology-driven course, we're going to show you from a very simplistic manner how using a tool such as RStudio, which by the way is free for everyone to try, but is a coding platform, how using RStudio can generate some of the data and the predictions and very simple predictions that you're hoping to achieve. That will be week 1 to 3 while we're going through the fundamentals. And thereafter, we're going to throw some group projects at you. And there will be a component of this, by the way, which is peer working or cross-peer collaboration, where you're working with your peers who may be suffering the same problems as you. You're sharing insights and ideas. But the group project really pulls everyone together, where we're giving you a data scenario. And not to give away the farm, but it's very similar to what Bo had mentioned on movie theaters, right? In this case, we're analyzing a retail store. And we're hoping to give you the opportunity to exercise some of the things that you would have learned in the first few weeks. We then finish the course off with a presentation where you're presenting to Bo and I on the ideas that you saw using the data that you have. And we'll provide you with feedback to say, hey, this may have worked. This other component could use a little more. So again, it's that feedback pattern that you can take back to your day-to-day. When I look at these 6 weeks or 20 hours together, I would say you will get out of the course what you put in. So a lot of students that we went through in the last go around, they had further questions, particularly around their day-to-day job or corporate roles. And they came to us as instructors to say, this is what I'm thinking of doing. Do you think this is a good idea? We were able to provide some feedback to help them along. The other component to think about here too is if you have more than one individual from your organization thinking about joining this, is not a bad thing to do because you may come away with different perspectives. As an example, I think if you were, for example, in the financial analyst role and there was somebody as a controller and the two of you are in this course together, you will come away with it thinking, hey, this is a day-to-day thing that I need to think about or do as a financial analyst. And as a controller, these are the strategic things I can challenge my team to do. The idea is, again, not to turn all of us to data scientists within 6 weeks, but is to give us the foundational skill sets to get started and to start taking away projects and help accelerate these projects through time. Okay. Ethan, why don't we move on to the next slide here? So we talked a little bit about what you'll learn. Here are some concrete factors. The course will be focused and centered around this concept of CRISP DM, which is an industry standard for data mining to understand what the data is, to really dive into what data do I have? Because I think a lot of organizations haven't reached that step yet. We may have a lot of data, we may have some data somewhere, but we do need to take inventory to say, what data do I have before you try to understand what you can predict. And then the third bullet there is we want to work with everyone to translate your business problem or business question into a predictive analytics project. So much like what Bo described in his case study, he had a clear business problem of what to do with theaters, how to close, how to translate that into revenue. We want to take your business problems and say, okay, how can you translate this into a predictive analytics project? And lastly, we want to think about the predictive accuracy. So for a lot of us in leadership roles, when your team comes back with a prediction and says, hey, we should do A, B, and C based on this prediction, we want to put you in a position where you can assess the fundamentals of the model and challenge whether or not the model can be accurate and relied upon. Those are some of the key learnings that we hope you can take away from this, okay? And with that, I do want to open up the floor to questions. I don't know if there have been in the chat. Let me take a quick look. But if anyone has questions, now would be the time. We're happy to field those at this time. Ethan, did you get any questions as we were going?
I personally haven't received any in the chat, but to anybody that is having any questions, you can either post them in the chat, as Will had mentioned, or if you'd like to unmute your microphone and just ask verbally, then that would be fine too. So we'll give a few minutes for those to come in if we have any, and go from there. So Will and Bo, if you don't mind, maybe as we see if there is any that are going to come in, I could give a few talking points that we could jump off and see if that leads to any other questions. So do you mind talking about the difference between predictive analytics and machine learning?
Sure, I can jump in on that. So when you think of, I alluded to a little bit when I was talking about kind of the difference between descriptive analytics and kind of predictive or prescriptive analytics. So descriptive analytics is really, looking at historical data, right? This is what finance departments historically have been really good at, creating financial statements, creating budgets off of historical numbers, creating forecasts by, just adding a 2% run rate or something like that. I'm sure everyone here is very familiar with those kind of analysis. And that's what we've done historically. And what predictive analytics is going kind of a step further and really trying to, you're still using historical data, but what you're doing is trying to learn, you're trying to get information that as humans, we can't necessarily see, right? Like we can look at the numbers and make a very high level kind of intuition-based judgment on what the numbers represent. But when you run predictive analytics on historical data, you get learnings that you yourself can't see, right? You're going to find out, which factors are really important, which criteria is actually really driving the movement of these numbers. And that's where predictive analytics really sits, right? It's really trying to help you kind of make a prediction in terms of what's going to happen next, right? And then even one step beyond that is what I call prescriptive analytics. It's going a step beyond kind of, predicting what the next set of numbers are going to be, but then using those numbers and actually turning that into like an action. Like, I'll give you guys an example, right? So, we were going through our budgeting process for us, and we were looking at, which locations we want to allocate our CapEx to, our capital expenditures, whether it's maintenance or new build or improvements. And, obviously we couldn't do it for every single theater that we had. So we need to kind of pick and choose. And how do you do that, right? Well, we would, have these 8-hour calls and we'll spend, maybe we'll probably start spending 10, 15, 20 minutes in the first couple of theaters. And then as the day goes on, you get to the last set of theaters, you're spending a few minutes each, right? People are burnt out. They don't really want to think about it. It's not their home, territory or home region. And, just kind of just throwing out numbers there and say, oh no, this theater, wow, I don't know much about it. let's just defer it to next year or something like that, right? And that's how, we would have done analysis before, right? But you can actually use analytics and kind of machine learning to kind of turn that analysis around, right? You can, everyone that sets up these kind of budget meetings, like everyone kind of has an idea what are the really important drivers of the business, right? But are you actually using that information, that data, to actually make your decision, right? And that's hard to answer for us. Like you sit in a meeting, you have a spreadsheet with like 20, 30 columns of data for every single location, and you're asking people to ingest all of that in 10, 20 minutes and then come to a decision on that. That's really hard to do, right? And even if you're doing it, it's really hard to tell, did you actually weigh each factor, right? Did you actually look at it and compare it to every other location? Like, is this a top ranking theater in revenues, or how do you do that, right? It's hard to do as a person just sitting there on your computer looking at it, right? But what we could actually do with predictive analytics is, you could take the decisions that come out of those meetings and you could run a model on that to say, hey, based on the decisions that historically has been done, from humans, how does that look from a machine learning perspective? Meaning that I'm going to give the machine or the model all the decisions that I've made. Meaning, for every single theater, did I say invest? Did I say, maintain? Did I say dispose? And let the machine figure out, based on your end decision, which of the 30 or 40 factors was most heavily weighed, right? Like, and it can, that model can produce kind of an importance score based on every criteria. And from there, you can see, did everyone kind of just shortcut that decision? Did they only really look at, was this theater a very high cash flow theater or is it a low cash flow theater? Did we basically ignore things like, the accident rates? Did we ignore things like population growth? Did we ignore things like, average distance for the average moviegoer to the theater? Did you ignore, pricing? Did you ignore whether there's competitors nearby? Right? Like there's all these factors that maybe, we kind of glossed over and didn't really use in our decision making. But predictive analytics or machine learning can really kind of highlight those kind of deficiencies, potentially, those biases, and help you, inform you of how your decision making process is going, right? Is it working? Are you potentially weighing things that you shouldn't be weighing? And are you disregarding things that you should actually be weighing? And this is something that we've actually used in our budgeting process now. And it's given us a lot of kind of insights into how we make decisions, which is, not something you normally would think about when you're using kind of these predictive analytics, but is also something that's really powerful to really kind of supplement what humans are doing. But I think I probably ignored Ethan's real question, which is the difference between machine learning and predictive analytics. But machine learning really is kind of, I would say it's a tool, right? It's the tool that you use to produce results, to really leverage and turn business issues into analytic solutions. So, people kind of use these terms interchangeably, but really the way I would see it is data mining or preparing and cleaning the data is kind of the process. And then machine learning and the algorithms you use and the coding is really the tool that you use it. And you combine those is what you get in terms of the holistic field, what we call kind of predictive analytics or prescriptive analytics. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, I was going to pull you back to the question, Bo.
Yeah.
But the other thing to think about, guys, is I think as we all know, like machine learning, AI, they are becoming buzzwords that almost every, whether it's SaaS solution or what any vendor will throw at us, right? What we want to do as part of this course is to give you a glimpse of, hey, under the hood, here's what machine learning could look like, and here's what machine learning is, and here's what AI translates to, because to give you that ammunition to go back to your day roles, I think will be very valuable, so you can call a spade, right? We had certain folks, especially for me in the cyber world, who say, hey, we use AI, and then when you kind of pull back the veil, you're like, not really. That's a spreadsheet with filtering on it. That's not quite AI, right? But I think that's a powerful way of going at it. A couple questions in the chat. I think Manoj is asking what level of stats programming background would you recommend? I wouldn't say there's a minimum here that you need to come prepared with, But if you want to take away more, and I know some folks in the last offering did, some folks came back and said, hey, I want to learn more about the programming side of this house. We do provide resources for you to get going on it. Again, like I mentioned, R is a free tool. I know Bo's using a number of tools in his day-to-day that he can share, and as am I. We'll kind of do a quick survey on those tools so that you can take it away. But we're not looking for, again, like Bo mentioned, math PhDs to come in here and really go after the statistics, okay? Another question, someone that's a CPA, but furthest thing from a finance professional, startup founder. I'm reading the question, you're doing product specializing in conversational analytics. I can't imagine that this would not be helpful. The connection, I think, is the powerful part, because as part of the 6-week module, one of the asks is for you to think about what we speak about in the class or in the conversations and how it may apply to your day-to-day role. And given you're doing conversational analytics, I think there's something there. One of our clients, who's a large call center, they've started to do analytics around this. They capture chat logs and they try to analyze and predict whether or not a potential customer will purchase a product based on the words that they are using. So we can go into more of that story, but obviously that has been a predictor for them. Okay.
Yeah, and just jumping in to Will's answer
ahead,
for
Bo.
that.
Yeah.
So, as a startup founder for you, even if your product per se is not really in the finance realm, you're at the end of the day, you're running a business, right? So you're looking at profits, you're looking at revenues, you're looking at costs, right? And all of that information, is relevant with predictive analytics, right? It doesn't really matter what your business is. It's applicable to every business because you're really using it to potentially drive revenues and see which you could use it to see which customers are more profitable, potentially which products are more profitable, have it predict kind of how you want to price things. So I wouldn't worry too much about that your business is a little bit different from kind of the traditional retail or brick and mortar businesses, and more think about like, you're running a business and all of this that we're going to teach you is going to be relevant. So you don't need to be, a finance practitioner or anything. That's not a requirement for this. So yeah, hopefully that helps.
Yeah. And I think that kind of answers the question for Jinjin as well. How much data analytics, data modeling, quantitative skills are required? Again, I think we welcome everyone with every skill set, but having understanding your business is probably key, and we'll kind of tease out the rest of it in terms of what data you can use and what data you should use. So I don't think I wouldn't put it past us to say there is, if you have a CPA and you have some background in finance, you have some background in your business, I think that's what we're looking for. Again,
yeah, like all the like data modeling, quantitative skills, there isn't, there's no real requirement for that. Like you don't need to have taken a stats 100 course or anything like that. Once you get under the hood, right, you actually understand how the models are, how they work. You realize that a lot of the computations or complex things like algorithms are really done by, the machine learning tools, like it's done by the R program or done by Python. You just need to kind of be able to tell it what you want it to do. Like you don't have to go and understand the mathematical formulas and things like that to really get a result. Like, people get kind of, I would say, intimidated a little bit when they hear that, oh, they have to use Python, they have to use R or things like that. But, the coding for that is probably, I'd say, less complicated than making a macro in Excel, right? Like, so I've seen Excel spreadsheets that are more complicated than some of the machine learning models that we produced. So I wouldn't get too worried about that. Neither Will nor I are programmers by trade or by background. So some of you guys probably better than us at that stuff. So
yeah, but the trick is, if someone's programming for you, can you ask the right questions or understand the flow so that you know what the model's doing, right? That's I think some of the fundamentals we're trying to get to. But you want to take the last question here from Robert?
Sure. So I think the question is, where does the data to be mined or analyzed generally come from? Is it internal to an organization or external data from a macro environment? Who accumulates this information? As every organization needs different information. How current would that data likely be? So that's many questions in one question. So I kind of start off with the first one, where does the data really come from, right? So normally it would typically start off from internal information that your business is gathering, right? As you run your business, as you're preparing your financial statements and things like that, you're accumulating data, right? You're accumulating costs, you're accumulating what your customers are buying, what your customers, where our customers are going, what locations are more profitable. All of that information typically resides, internally in an organization. And that's usually what your starting point would be, right? Because, your business problem normally is focused on your business, and the data that is most relevant to your business is going to be data you've collected yourself. Usually when you start looking at external data, there's kind of two issues with it. The first, typically it comes in unstructured format, meaning that, it's not going to be linked to kind of your business or your product, right? It's going to be generalized. It's hard to figure out exactly where it's coming from, what kind of biases might exist in there. So it's a little bit more difficult and more time consuming to use external data. And secondly, there's a cost associated with external data, right? If you're looking to try to get maybe like Google Trends results, you're trying to maybe get information from different websites, third-party websites. Maybe you're looking to get like, details on what products are the most bought on Amazon or things like that. Like none of that really comes free, right? Because all these other businesses and third parties, they want to monetize their data as well, right? They want to be able to sell it. They want to be able to extract value out of that as well. So hopefully that answers that part. The second part of the question, who accumulates this data? So typically, the data would get accumulated through your, assuming if you have an ERP system, it usually sits in there. Like the ERP system kind of tends to have all of that operational data, but you might have in-house systems that, are capturing this data on a transactional level, right? It's usually, this discussion kind of involves IT. You kind of have to have an understanding of, where they're keeping their data, what kind of databases are there, what kind of information is there, right? Like, because there's a lot of information that is potentially being stored and recorded, but no one actually knows that it is, right? So one of the first kind of issues that you might run into when you first start looking at your first problem is, what data do we actually have, right? Because it's, some of it might not be easily accessible and it might not be something is visible to everyone. So usually it kind of just involves discussion with IT and go from there.
Okay, I think that's the session. Thanks so much for everyone joining. We hope we answer some of your questions, but again, we're hoping this course is something of interest. Do shoot an email. I think Ethan just popped in the email address. How much time would you estimate someone spends outside the 20 hours? Is the last question, I think. I think it's entirely up to the participants. Again, I think you get what you put in. We had a lot of people who spent a lot of time and they really took it away, and one of whom is already starting a predictive analytics project at work that's going very well. So again, it depends on what we put in, but we do hope that you'll find it useful, and it accelerates not only your organization but also your career. Okay, with that, Ethan, do you want to help us wrap up and then we can park it there?
Yes, thanks. Well, so we just have some closing remarks today. So for those of you who are CPA Ontario members, you will be able to receive 1 PD hour for attending today's info session. We will just submit your name and the contact information that you use to register for today's event to CPA Ontario so that you do receive your hours. As Will had touched on, if you do have any other questions, please feel free to email us. Our website is on the slide there if you want to check that out for more information about the upcoming course. So with that, thanks everybody for attending today, and we hope to see you all at the course in September. Thank you very much.
Thank you.